Hey boys and girls, we're going to start our big story of Peter Pan today. And I'm going to read it to you, and your teacher can play it today, and there'll be one for every day this week. We'll have 5 different sessions. It's a very long book. But I'd like to recommend this to you. It's important after you read a book, if you're able to recommend it to someone. And I like this one for a lot of different reasons, but I'm going to share it after we get going in reading the book because I don't want to have a spoiler for you. So anyway, I hope you really think of the characters because you get to pick one of the characters and dress up like them. And we'll talk more about that as we go along. I'm going to open the book now, and everybody knows that this is called the title page. And everyone at Memorial knows that on the title page is the title, and you can read that, Peter Pan. Before I get started, I would like to remind everyone how important it is to be a super good listener. Listening is key to learning. So take a minute, take a deep breath, roll your shoulders back, make sure you have your own space. We don't want to touch anybody. Let's be a really, really good listener. And I will start the story for you. And I hope you enjoy the pictures. The Darling family lived in London in a big house with a big backyard. 6 of them lived in the house. Listen to who lives in the house. Mr. Darling, Mrs. Darling, and their children, Wendy, Michael, and Justin. And then there was Nana, the children's nursemaid. Nana also happened to be a dog, but she took wonderful care of the children. She served them breakfast, gave them their medicine, and tucked them in snugly at night in bed. She also looked after them when their parents went out for the evening. On one such night, Mr. and Mrs. Darling were planning to go out to the theater. That same night, Peter Pan decided to visit the house, and it wasn't his first visit either. But before Mr. and Mrs. Darling could go out, they had to get dressed. Mr. Darling was upset because he could not get his tie just right. Although he was quite a clever man, Mr. Darling sometimes had trouble with the simple tasks, such as getting dressed. This night, he was even more upset because his children had drawn a picture of a map on the front of his shirt. Luckily, Miss Darling had been able to get the chalk marks out. Still, Mr. Darling shouted at his children and even shouted at poor Nana, who hadn't done anything wrong. Not even Mrs. Darling could calm him down. Meanwhile, Michael and John were playing with their cardboard swords, pretending they were Peter Pan and Captain Hook. "You thought you could escape, Peter Pan, but now I've got you," said John as they jumped across the bed. Mr. Darling called the story of Peter Pan Poppycock and Fiddle Battle. But the Darling children believed that he was real. "You're getting too old for this nonsense," Mr. Darling told Wendy. "This will be your last night in the nursery. Tomorrow, you move to your own room." Wendy was not happy to hear this, and the whole family was unhappy. Well, Mr. Darling decided to tie Nana outside for the night. After Nana was tied outside and the Darling children were tucked in bed and kissed goodnight, Mr. and Mrs. Darling left for the theater. Immediately after they left, Peter Pan slipped into the window of the nursery. It seemed that he'd been visiting the nursery a few nights earlier. He liked to sit in the shadows and listen to the wonderful stories Wendy always told her brothers. However, on his last visit, Peter had gotten separated from his shadow, and Nana couldn't give it back to him. Wendy was thrilled when she woke up and saw Peter Pan leaping across the room. He was chasing his own shadow, but she wasn't thrilled when she felt a tug on her hair. "Ouch! Who's doing that?" squealed Wendy. It was Tinker Bell, the little pixie who followed Peter wherever he went. "Stop that, Tink," he ordered her. When Wendy finally caught his shadow, Wendy offered to sew it back for him. He told her how much he liked listening to her stories. "Yes, but I have to grow up tomorrow," she told him. "Tonight is my last night in the nursery." "Come with me to Neverland," said Peter. "You'll never grow up there." Wendy thought about Neverland. It sounded like a lot of fun, and she woke up her brothers, Michael and John. The boys couldn't wait to go to Neverland. "But how will we get there?" Wendy asked. "All you have to do is fly," Peter told him. The Darling children were astonished. "But how do we do that?" said Wendy. Peter scratched his head and thought. "All you have to do is think about wonderful things. And you need a little pixie dust too." He sprinkled pixie dust from Tinkerbell on them, and soon the Darling children were flying around the nursery. "Come on, let's go," said Peter. They flew all night long to Neverland, an island complete with a pirate cove, an Indian village, and a lagoon where mermaids lived. They could see Captain Hook's big ship anchored in the bay. Captain Hook had two enemies, Peter Pan and a hungry crocodile. One day, while fighting with Peter, the captain had his hand cut off. The greedy crocodile had grabbed his hand, bit it off, and swallowed it. He liked the taste so much, he just kept following Captain Hook ever since, hoping he could get another tasty bite. Later, Captain Hook fed the crocodile a clock. That way, at least, he could hear the crocodile sneaking up on him. Captain Hook had very sharp eyes. As soon as he saw Peter Pan flying over the ship, he shouted, "Prepare for action! I'll get him this time. I've waited years for this." Peter, Wendy, and the boys were resting on a big cloud when, boom! There was a big explosion, and the cloud was split in two by a cannonball shot from the ship. "Tink! Take Wendy and the boys to the island!" screamed Peter Pan. "I must have a few words with my old friend, Captain Hook." Tinkerbell agreed, but Tinkerbell, she had her own plan. She flew so fast, Wendy and the boys, they couldn't keep up with her. They could barely see her flying ahead of them. "Wait for us, Tinker Bell!" shouted Wendy. And even though the darling children flew faster than was safe for them, they couldn't even see the tiny flash of light from the pixie. Tinker Bell had made up her mind. She didn't like Wendy because that girl was taking all of Peter Pan's attention away from her. All she cared about was getting rid of Wendy. She dived down into the clump of tree on the island and headed straight for a hollow tree. She knew exactly where she was going and exactly what she would do. We're going to stop right there. You're going to get time to talk about it and write about it and retell our story so far and be thinking, what is in that hollow tree? Thank you. You're a very good listeners, and we'll be ready for more tomorrow.